The council chamber hung in the void between stars, a massive station built by the Valorum Collective thousands of years before humans learned to make fire. Inside the Great Hall, representatives from 47 species waited in their designated sections. Some breathed oxygen, others methane. Some saw invisible light, others in frequencies human eyes could never detect. But they all understood one thing. Power. War Chief Gorax of the Kreth Empire stood 9 feet tall, his forearms crossed over his armored chest. His species had conquered 73 worlds in the last century alone. Next to him, the Valorum ambassador appeared almost human-like, except for the silver skin and eyes that held 50,000 years of memory. The Zintari representative was smaller, barely 4 feet high, but everyone knew his species controlled the banking systems of 200 star systems. They were all waiting for the humans. Ambassador Sarah Chun walked into the chamber with 5 other humans. No guards, no weapons, no massive display of military power. The other species watched with barely concealed amusement. 2 centuries of faster-than-light travel, and this was all humanity brought? A middle-aged woman in a simple suit and 5 assistants carrying nothing but data tablets. Gorax let out a sound that his translator rendered as laughter. This is the species that requests council membership. Where are your warships? Where is your tribute? Where is your proof of strength? Sarah smiled. It was not the smile of someone who had been insulted. It was the smile of someone who had done her homework. War Chief Gorax, we come with something more valuable than warships. And what is that, little human? The Kreth warrior leaned forward, his fangs gleaming. We come with solutions to problems you didn't know you could solve. The chamber filled with various sounds that the translators interpreted as laughter, scoffing, and dismissal. The Valorum ambassador spoke, his voice ancient and tired. We have existed for 50 millennia. Our civilization was old when your ancestors lived in caves. What could you possibly offer us? Sarah's assistant touched her tablet, and a holographic display filled the center of the chamber. It showed a star map of a region known as the Outer Sectors. This area had been disputed between the Valorum Collective and the Zintari Consortium for 300 years. Both species had legitimate claims. Both refused to back down. Neither could afford another war, but neither would accept the loss of face the compromise would bring. The Outer Sectors, Sarah said simply. 300 years of deadlock. May I present a proposal? The Zintari representative's translator conveyed skepticism. Many have tried. All have failed. The Valorum will not abandon their historical claim, and we will not surrender our economic interests. I'm not asking anyone to surrender anything, Sarah said. She expanded the hologram. The Valorum claimed the outer sectors based on settlement rights from 12,000 years ago. The Zintari claimed them based on current economic development and resource investment. Both claims are valid. The problem is that everyone thinks this is a conflict with a winner and a loser. She manipulated the display, and the sector broke into different colored zones. What if neither side needs to win? The Valorum value historical preservation and cultural significance. The Zintari need resource extraction and trade routes. These aren't actually opposing interests. The chamber went quiet. Sarah continued, I propose a joint stewardship. The Valorum maintains sovereignty over all historical sites and culturally significant worlds. The Zintari receive exclusive economic development rights in the resource-rich zones, which don't overlap with the historical sites. Both species contribute to a joint defense force for the region. Both species profit. The Zintari representative's eyes widened. His people had wanted those resources for centuries, but couldn't take them without war. The Valorum ambassador sat very still, his ancient face unreadable. His people had wanted to protect their historical sites, but lacked the economic power to develop the region. Why would this work when other compromises failed? The Valorum asked carefully. Because it's not a compromise, Sarah said. A compromise means both sides give up something they want. This is a solution where both sides get what they actually need. The Valorum need cultural preservation recognized. The Zintari need economic access. You've been so focused on winning that nobody asked what winning really means. Gorax snorted. Pretty words. But where is the strength? Where is the force that makes them keep this agreement? Sarah turned to face him directly. War Chief, how many rebellions is the Kreth Empire currently facing? The massive warrior's eyes narrowed. That is not your concern. 3, according to our information. 3 territories that cost you more in military expenses each year than they produce in value. You crush each rebellion, and 5 years later, another one starts. How is that strength? It is the Kreth way. We conquer. We control. And it drains your empire's resources while your enemies grow stronger. Sarah's voice was calm, stating facts without judgment. What if there was another way? What if those territories wanted to stay in your empire? Impossible. The conquered do not love their conquerors. Not if they're conquered. But what if they chose to join? What if they saw benefit instead of force? Sarah smiled again. I'd like to discuss that with you after this session, War Chief. No obligation. Just a conversation. The main session continued with formal procedures, introductions, and bureaucratic necessities. The Council would vote on humanity's membership application in 6 months. It was all very standard. But something had shifted in the chamber. When representatives spoke to each other during breaks, they spoke about the outer sector's proposal. The Valorum ambassador approached Sarah as the session ended. Your proposal for the outer sectors. You would present this formally? If both parties are interested, yes. The Zintari and I will discuss it. He paused, studying her with those ancient eyes. Where do you learn to see problems this way? From studying you, Sarah said. All of you. We spent 200 years learning everything we could about every species in the galaxy. Not your weapons, not your technology. We learned what you value, what you fear, what you truly want versus what you say you want. Turns out, when you really understand someone, solutions become obvious. The Valorum ambassador was quiet for a long moment. That is either very wise or very dangerous. Maybe both, Sarah agreed. As the human delegation left the chamber, Gorax watched them go. His tactical officer leaned close. They are weak. No ships, no weapons. Yes, Gorax said slowly. But they made the Valorum and Zintari smile at the same time. I have never seen that in 200 years of council sessions. He tapped his armored chest thoughtfully. Perhaps they have a different kind of weapon. In the human delegation's quarters, Sarah's team gathered for debriefing. How do you think it went? One assistant asked. Sarah pulled up the recordings of the session, reviewing the body language and reactions of the various species. Better than expected. We've got 6 months before the vote. That's 6 months to show them what humanity really brings to the table. And what's that? Another assistant asked. The ability to help everyone get what they want. Sarah smiled. Turns out that's more powerful than most people realize. Across the station, in various quarters and meeting rooms, representatives from dozens of species were having the same conversation. The humans were strange. They were weak by traditional measures. But something about them was different. Something that made even ancient enemies pause and reconsider. The galaxy was about to learn that there were many kinds of strength, and humanity had mastered one that no other species had even thought to develop. The journey had only just begun. 6 months passed like water flowing downhill, inevitable and surprisingly fast. The Valorum and Zinthari signed the Outer Sectors Agreement in a ceremony that made history. For the first time in 3 centuries, the two ancient powers stood together without hostility. Other species watched and wondered. Sarah Chun found herself busier than she had ever imagined. What started as a simple membership application turned into something else entirely. Species that had never spoken to the human delegation before suddenly requested meetings. They came with problems, disputes, and conflicts they had carried for decades or centuries. The pattern was always the same. 2 or more species locked in a disagreement, each convinced they were right, each unable to back down without losing face. And each time, Sarah and her team would ask the same questions. What do you actually need? What does your opponent actually need? Where do these needs overlap? The Thracian unity and the cognitive sphere had been in a Cold War for 40 years over scientific research, rights in a nebula that both species claimed. The Thracians were organic beings who valued individual achievement. The cognitive sphere was a hive mind that valued collective knowledge. They saw each other as fundamentally incompatible. Sarah met with both sides separately first. She learned that the Thracians wanted recognition for their scientists' discoveries. The cognitive sphere wanted the knowledge itself to be shared freely. These seemed like opposite goals until Sarah asked a different question. Why couldn't both happen? The solution was simple once she saw it. All research in the nebula would be published under the names of the scientists who made the discoveries, giving the Thracians what they craved. But all findings would be immediately released to the galactic scientific community with no patents or restrictions, giving the cognitive sphere what they needed. Both sides got exactly what they wanted because someone finally asked what they were really fighting for. But the biggest test came from an unexpected source. War Chief Gorax requested a private meeting with Sarah. No translators except the automated ones. No witnesses. Just the 2 of them in a neutral conference room. The massive Kreth warrior looked uncomfortable in a way that Sarah had never seen before. You spoke of the rebellions in my empire, he said without preamble. You said there might be another way. There is, Sarah said. But first, I need to understand something. Why do the territories rebel? Because they are weak. They do not accept Kreth's strength. War Chief, I've studied the rebellion reports. The territories aren't rebelling against strength. They're rebelling against how they're governed. The Kreth Empire takes their resources, replaces their leaders, forbids their cultural practices. You're not giving them any reason to want to be part of your empire. Gorax's 4 hands clenched into fists. This is how conquest works. The strong rule. The weak submit. And how much does it cost you? Sarah pulled up data on her tablet. Each rebellion costs your empire more in military expenses than those territories produce in value. You're losing money and warriors to whole planets that don't want you there. Is that strength or is that waste? The war chief stood abruptly, towering over Sarah. For a moment, she thought she had pushed too far. Then he sat back down, heavily. What would you have me do? Show weakness by releasing them? No. Show strength by transforming them. Sarah leaned forward. What if those 3 territories became protectorates? They govern themselves. They keep their cultures. They pay tribute to the Kreth Empire, but reasonable tribute based on what they can afford. In exchange, the Empire provides military protection and trade access. They would never agree. They would if the tribute is fair and the benefits are real. War Chief, think about this. Right now, you spend millions in military costs to hold them. They produce almost nothing because they're too busy rebelling. But if they were protectorates, they'd be productive. They'd pay tribute willingly. You'd save the military costs. You'd actually profit more from 3 peaceful protectorates than from 3 occupied territories. Gorax was silent for a long time. The Kreth have never done this. The Kreth have never had someone show them the math. Sarah displayed the cost analysis. You're warriors, not accountants. But the numbers don't lie. Peaceful protectorates will make your empire stronger and richer than occupied territories ever could. Other Kreth will say I'm weak. Then you frame it differently. You tell them that the Kreth Empire is so powerful that you don't need to waste warriors holding conquered worlds. You tell them that only a weak empire needs to micromanage every planet. A strong empire can allow autonomy because it fears nothing. Sarah met his eyes. You make it about showing how strong you are, not how weak. The war chief was quiet again. Then, slowly he nodded. I will consider this. But I make no promises. That's all I ask. 3 weeks later, the Kreth Empire announced a new policy. 3 rebellious territories would become autonomous protectorates. They would self-govern but remain under Kreth military protection. The galaxy watched in shock. The Kreth had never done anything like this before. Within 2 months, the 3 protectorates were more productive than they had been in decades. The tribute they paid to the Empire was less than the military costs had been, but because they were actually working instead of rebelling, the Empire came out ahead. Other occupied Kreth territories began petitioning for the same status. Sarah's team was overwhelmed with requests. A mining dispute between 5 species that had lasted 60 years. A trade route conflict that threatened to become a war. A cultural misunderstanding that had frozen diplomatic relations for 2 decades. Each problem seemed impossible until someone asked the right questions. The turning point came 4 months after the initial council session. The Valorum Collective and the Zinthari Consortium, ancient rivals who had fought 3 full-scale wars over the millennia, made a joint announcement. They were requesting human mediation for all their remaining territorial disputes. The galaxy stopped. The Valorum and Zinthari had been enemies since before most current species achieved spaceflight. If humanity could mediate between them, it would change everything. Sarah assembled her best team. They spent 3 months in continuous sessions with both species. The Valorum brought claims dating back thousands of years. The Zinthari brought economic analyses and resource projections. Each side was absolutely certain they were right. Sarah's approach was the same as always. She listened. She asked questions. She looked for what each side actually needed instead of what they claimed they wanted. She found overlaps that neither side had noticed. She identified areas where cooperation would benefit both more than competition. The final treaty was 300 pages long, but the core was simple. The Valorum and Zinthari would create joint economic zones in disputed territories. Both species would administer them together. Profits would be shared based on a formula that both sides agreed was fair. Cultural sites would be preserved. Economic development would continue. And humanity would serve as neutral arbiters if disputes arose. When the treaty was announced, the council chamber erupted in chaos. Species that had been preparing for another Valorum-Zinthari war suddenly found themselves witnessing unprecedented cooperation. The implications were staggering. Sarah sat in her quarters that night, exhausted but satisfied. Her assistant brought her a cup of coffee, real coffee from Earth, a luxury this far from home. Do you think we'll get membership now? The assistant asked. Sarah sipped the coffee, savoring the familiar taste. I think we've already become members, whether the council votes for it or not. We've made ourselves necessary. Is that the plan? Make them need us? No, Sarah said. The plan is to make the galaxy better for everyone. If they need us to do that, then we're succeeding. Across the station, in dozens of quarters, representatives from dozens of species were realizing the same thing. The humans had changed the game. They hadn't conquered through force. They hadn't dominated through economics. They had done something that no species had managed before. They had made Cooperation more profitable than conflict. The council vote was scheduled for 2 weeks away, but everyone already knew the result. The question was no longer whether humanity would join the council. The question was what humanity would do next. The council chamber was packed. Every species had sent representatives, even those who normally skipped the routine sessions. This was not routine. This was history. Sarah Chun stood in the center of the chamber, calm and composed. Around her, the representatives of 47 species waited in their sections. Some looked friendly. Some looked curious. A few looked hostile. And War Chief Gorax looked thoughtful, which was perhaps the most surprising thing of all. The vote should have been simple. Humanity had proven itself over the past 6 months. The Outer Sector's agreement was working. The Kreth Protectorates were thriving. The Valorum-Zinthri Treaty had prevented what everyone thought would be an inevitable war. Dozens of smaller disputes had been resolved. By any measure, humanity had earned its place. But Gorax stood, his massive frame dominating the chamber. I call for challenge. The room went silent. A challenge meant that someone doubted the applicant's worthiness. It meant formal debate before the vote. It meant that membership was not guaranteed. The Valorum ambassador spoke, his ancient voice concerned. War Chief, humanity has proven itself many times over. What basis do you have for challenge? That is exactly my point, Gorax said. His translator carried his words to every species in their own language. Humanity has proven something, yes. But what? Not strength of arms. Not age of civilization. Not wealth or technology. They have proven that they can manipulate. Sarah felt her team tense behind her, but she remained calm. She had expected this, or something like it. Gorax continued. They listen to us. They ask questions. They find our weaknesses and exploit them. They make us think we are getting what we want while they position themselves at the center of everything. Look around this chamber. How many of you now depend on human mediation? How many of your agreements require human arbitration? They have made themselves necessary, and we invited them to do it. Several representatives shifted uncomfortably. The Kreth warrior was not wrong. Humanity had become central to galactic diplomacy in just 6 months. They use our own desires against us, Gorax said. They play us like instruments. This is not strength. This is trickery. This is manipulation. He turned to face Sarah directly. And I say they have not earned their place among us. They have tricked their way here. The chamber erupted in debate. Some species agreed with Gorax. Others defended humanity. The noise grew until the council moderator called for silence. Sarah raised her hand. May I respond? The moderator, a crystalline being from a species that valued fairness above all else, gestured for her to speak. War Chief Gorax has made serious accusations, Sarah said. Her voice was steady, carrying clearly through the chamber. He says we manipulate. He says we trick. He says we exploit weaknesses. I will not insult this council by denying these charges with false modesty. Instead, I will ask each of you a question. She turned slowly, making eye contact with representatives from different species. Are you better off now than you were 6 months ago? The Zinthri representative spoke first. Our economy has grown faster in these 6 months than in the previous decade. The outer sectors alone have generated more wealth than we projected for the next 5 years. The Valorum ambassador added, we have preserved our cultural heritage while expanding our influence. We have not had to choose between history and future. One by one, representatives spoke. The Thracian scientist who led their delegation talked about the breakthrough research coming from the shared nebula. A representative from one of the Kreth protectorates spoke about prosperity and peace. A dozen species mentioned resolved conflicts, new partnerships, and unprecedented cooperation. Sarah, Let them speak without interruption. When the chamber finally quieted, she turned back to Gorax. "You are absolutely right, War Chief," she said. "We did manipulate. We manipulated you into peace. We manipulated you into prosperity. We manipulated you into getting what you actually wanted instead of what you thought you had to fight for." She paused. "And yes, we listened. We asked questions. We found what you valued and helped you achieve it. If that is trickery, then I am proud to be a trickster." Gorax's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. "Every species here has its own kind of strength. The Kreth conquer with military might. The Valorum endure through ancient wisdom. The Zinthri dominate through economic power. The Thracians excel through scientific achievement. Each of you has something you do better than anyone else." She gestured to the humans standing behind her. "Our strength is different. We understand people. We see what others need. We find connections that others miss. We solve problems by making everyone winners instead of dividing the galaxy into winners and losers." "Pretty words," Gorax said, but his tone was less hostile than before. "Not just words. Results." Sarah pulled up data across the chamber's displays. 6 months ago, the galaxy had 12 active conflicts, 3 of which were heading toward war. Now there are 4 conflicts, and all of them have mediation in progress. 6 months ago, the Valorum and Zinthri were mobilizing fleets. Now they are building trading stations together. 6 months ago, the Kreth Empire was spending 30% of its budget on occupation forces. Now that number is down to 15%, and the protectorates are more productive than they ever were as occupied territories. The data scrolled across the screens, undeniable and clear. "War Chief, you asked if we have earned our place," Sarah said. "I say we have. Not through conquest, not through age, not through wealth. We earned our place by making the galaxy better for everyone in it." She met his eyes. "If that is manipulation, then perhaps the galaxy needed to be manipulated." The chamber was absolutely silent. Even the species that breathed different atmospheres seemed to be holding their breath. Gorax stood motionless for a long moment. Then, slowly, he began to laugh. It was not a mocking laugh. It was the laugh of a warrior who had just realized he had lost a battle he did not know he was fighting. "You are dangerous, Ambassador Chun," he said. "More dangerous than any warrior I have faced. Because you make people want to do what you want them to do. You make defeat feel like victory." He paused. "But I cannot argue with results. My empire is stronger. My people are wealthier. Even I, stubborn fool that I am, can see that." He sat down heavily. "I withdraw my challenge. Let the vote proceed." The council moderator called for the vote. Species could vote yes, no, or abstain. The display showed the results as they came in. Yes, yes. One after another, every species voted in favor. Even Gorax, grumbling about how humanity had made the galaxy too peaceful, voted yes. When the final tally appeared, it was unanimous. Humanity was now a full member of the Galactic Council. Sarah felt the weight of the moment. 6 months ago, they had walked into this chamber as outsiders. Now they were part of the oldest political body in the known galaxy. But she knew this was just the beginning. The celebration that followed was subdued by galactic standards. Humans were not big on elaborate ceremonies. But as Sarah made her way through the crowd of well-wishers, she noticed something interesting. Representatives from different species were talking to each other in ways they never had before. The Valorum and Zinthri were discussing a new joint venture. The Thracians and the Cognitive Sphere were planning a collaborative research project. Even Gorax was having what looked like a civil conversation with a species the Kreth had been at war with just a year ago, the Valorum. Ambassador found Sarah in the crowd. "You have changed something fundamental," he said. For 50,000 years, we have measured power by force, by age, by wealth. You have introduced a new measure. And what is that? Sarah asked. The power to help others succeed. The ancient being's eyes held something that might have been wonder. We never thought to measure power that way. But now that we have seen it, we cannot unsee it. Sarah smiled. That was the idea. Later, in the human delegation's quarters, her team gathered to celebrate. They were exhausted, but satisfied. Someone had brought champagne from Earth. Expensive and difficult to transport, but worth it for this moment. What happens now? One of the assistants asked. We've got council membership. Mission accomplished. Sarah sipped her champagne, looking out at the stars visible through the viewing port. Now the real work begins. Membership was never the goal. It was just the entry fee. The goal is to change how the galaxy works. To make cooperation more profitable than conflict. To make peace more attractive than war. Can we really do that? Another assistant asked. We've made a good start, Sarah said. But the galaxy is big and change is slow. There will be species that resist. There will be conflicts we cannot solve. There will be times when our way does not work. She turned to face her team. But we've proven that it can work. We've shown that there is another path besides conquest and domination. That is not a small thing. Across the galaxy, the news spread. Humanity had joined the council. But more importantly, humanity had changed what it meant to have power. The old ways still existed, of course. There were still wars. There were still conflicts. But now there was also another option, one that more and more species were beginning to see the value of. The galaxy had not been conquered by humanity, but it had been changed by them. And that change was just beginning. 5 years passed. The council chamber looked the same as it always had, but everything else was different. Where once species gathered in hostile blocks, carefully watching their enemies, now they mixed freely. The Valorum sat next to the Zintari. The Kreth shared military intelligence with species they had once conquered. The Thracians collaborated with the cognitive sphere on projects that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. And at the center of it all, quietly but undeniably, was humanity. Sarah Chung was no longer just an ambassador. She had become the Council's chief mediator, a position that had not existed before humanity joined. When conflicts arose, species asked for her team. When treaties needed drafting, they followed what had become known as the Chun Protocols. When young diplomats from any species began their training, they studied humanity's approach to negotiation. But success brought new challenges. The Caldrus Dominion had been watching from the edges of Council space for years. They were a powerful military species, even more aggressive than the Kreth had been. They had their own empire of 200 worlds, none of which were part of the Council. And they were not impressed by humanity's peaceful methods. When the Caldrus finally requested a council session, everyone knew it would not be friendly. General Dex of the Caldrus stood in the center of the chamber, his 3 heads surveying the gathered species with obvious contempt. The council has grown soft, he announced. You have let these humans make you weak. You resolve conflicts with words when you should resolve them with strength. You negotiate when you should dominate. Sarah sat in the human section, listening carefully. Her team had spent weeks studying the Caldrus. They were proud, militaristic, and valued strength above all else. They saw compromise as weakness and cooperation as surrender. The Caldrus Dominion will not join your council of the weak, Dex continued. But we are here to issue a challenge. We claim the frontier zones as Caldrus territory. Any species that objects may face us in combat. That is the old way, the true way, the strong way. The frontier zones were a group of uninhabited star systems rich in resources. They sat between Council space and Caldrus space. Under the old rules, before humanity, such a claim would have led to war. Multiple species wanted those resources. Multiple species would have fought for them. But now, the council representatives looked to Sarah. She stood, and the chamber quieted. General Dex, the frontier zones are unclaimed because no single species has the right to take them. They represent resources that could benefit many. Then let many come and fight us for them, Dex said. His translator carried his contempt clearly. That is how the strong resolve such disputes. That is how the wasteful resolve such disputes, Sarah corrected him. Tell me, General, how many warriors would you lose taking the frontier zones if the council opposed you? We would lose some, but we would win. And how many years would it take to extract enough resources to make up for those losses? How much would you spend on military occupation while other species raided your supply lines? How much would your economy suffer while your fleets were tied up in an unwinnable occupation? Sarah pulled up projections on the chamber displays. Our analysis suggests that even if you won militarily, you would lose economically. The frontier zones would cost more than they would ever produce. You try to frighten us with numbers, Dex scoffed. The Cauldress fear nothing. I'm not trying to frighten you. I'm trying to show you a better option. Sarah expanded the display. What if the frontier zones became a joint development area? Multiple species working together, sharing resources and profits based on investment and labor. The Cauldress could participate. You have a strong industrial base and an excellent workforce. You would profit more from cooperation than from conquest. The Cauldress do not cooperate. We dominate. And how is that working for you? Sarah asked bluntly. You control 200 worlds, but your economy is stagnant. You spend so much on military occupation that you have little left for development. Your people are warriors, yes, but they could be wealthy warriors instead of poor ones. The three heads of General Dex conferred with each other in their own language, too rapid for the translators to follow. Finally, the center head spoke. You offer us words. Pretty lies to make us weak. I offer you math, Sarah said. And the math does not lie. Look at the Kreth Empire. 5 years ago, War Chief Gorax thought as you do. Now his empire is stronger and richer than it has been in centuries. Not because he conquered more, but because he learned to rule more efficiently. Gorax himself stood from the Kreth section. The human speaks truth, General X. I resisted their way. I called it weakness. I was wrong. The massive Kreth warrior gestured around the chamber. My empire has grown in wealth by 30%. My warriors are better equipped. My people are more loyal. And I achieved this not by conquering more worlds, but by making the worlds I already had want to be part of my empire. Dex looked at Gorax with something like pity. So they have broken even you, the great war chief. They have made you soft. They have made me smart, Gorax corrected. There is a difference between strength and stupidity. I was stupid. Now I am strong and smart. The chamber filled with murmurs. The Cauldress general stood rigid, his three heads conferring again. Sarah waited. She had learned that sometimes the best negotiation tactic was silence. Finally, Dex spoke. The Cauldress will consider your proposal for the frontier zones, but we make no promises. We will review your math. If we find it acceptable, we may participate in this joint development. He paused. But if we find it unacceptable, we will take what we want by force. That is fair, Sarah said. It was not complete victory, but it was a start. The Cauldress had come expecting to issue demands and leave. Instead, they were considering cooperation. That was progress. After the session, Sarah found Gorax waiting outside the chamber. The war chief had become an unlikely ally over the years. You handled that well, Gorax said. But the Cauldress are more stubborn than even the Kreth were. They may not be convinced. Maybe not today, Sarah agreed. But we've planted a seed. They'll review the numbers. They'll see that cooperation is more profitable. And even if they do not join immediately, we've shown them there is another option. And if they attack anyway, then the Council will defend the frontier zones together. And the Cauldress will learn the hard way what we learned the easy way, that working together is stronger than working alone. Sarah smiled. But I think they'll come around. The math really does not lie. Months passed. The Cauldress reviewed the proposal. They sent economists, scientists, and military analysts to verify humanity's projections. And slowly, reluctantly, they reached the same conclusion that every other species had reached. Cooperation was more profitable than conquest. The Cauldress joined the Frontier Zones Development Project. They did not join the Council, not yet. But they participated. They worked alongside species they would have fought just years before. And they prospered. On Earth, Sarah Chun finally returned home after 7 years in space. She had been appointed to a new position, Director of Galactic Relations. She would split her time between Earth and the Council Station, guiding humanity's ongoing work in changing how the galaxy operated. A reporter met her at the spaceport. Ambassador Chun, humanity has achieved something remarkable in just 7 years. We have gone from newcomers to one of the most influential species in the Council. How did we do it? Sarah thought about the question carefully. We did it by understanding a simple truth that others had forgotten. Everyone wants something. And if you can help people get what they want, they will work with you rather than against you. Some critics say we have manipulated the galaxy. We have, Sarah agreed. We have manipulated them into peace. We have manipulated them into prosperity. We have manipulated them into cooperation. If that is wrong, then I will happily be wrong. What is next for humanity? Sarah looked up at the stars, visible even in Earth's daytime sky now that humanity had cleaned up the atmosphere. Next, we keep working. The galaxy is big. There are still conflicts. There are still species that prefer war to peace. There is still work to do. Do you think we can really change the whole galaxy? We already have, Sarah said. 7 years ago, the galaxy measured power by the size of your fleet or the age of your civilization. Now they measure it by your ability to solve problems and create solutions. That is a fundamental change. The rest is just details. Across the galaxy, in the council chamber, a Velorum historian was writing a retrospective on the era. She had lived for 18,000 years and seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations. But what humanity had done was unique in her long memory. She wrote, "Humanity entered a galaxy of conquerors, merchants, and ancient powers. They brought no massive fleets, no unbeatable technology, no overwhelming resources. They brought something far more powerful, the ability to help us all get what we actually wanted. In doing so, they did not conquer the galaxy. They made conquest obsolete." Future historians will debate whether this was manipulation or enlightenment. Perhaps it was both. Perhaps the difference does not matter. What matters is the result, a galaxy that grows richer and more peaceful with each passing year. A galaxy where cooperation is more profitable than conflict. A galaxy where the newest species showed the oldest species something they had somehow forgotten in all their millennia of existence. They showed us that the most powerful force in the universe is not the biggest gun or the oldest civilization or the largest economy. It is the ability to understand what someone else wants and help them achieve it. They showed us that when everyone wins, everyone truly wins. The humans have a saying, "A rising tide lifts all boats." They have become the rising tide. And they have lifted us all with them. In the council chamber, a young diplomat from a species humanity had never even heard of 7 years ago asked her mentor a question. Why do we follow the human approach to negotiation? Why not go back to the old ways? The mentor, an elderly Zintari who had been present when humanity first joined the council, smiled. Because the human way works. It works better than anything we tried in 10,000 years. They did not conquer us with weapons. They conquered us with something much more powerful. They gave us peace and called it victory. The young diplomat thought about this. So humanity really did conquer the galaxy? No, the mentor said. Humanity did something much more impressive. They convinced the galaxy to conquer itself. They showed us that we were fighting over scraps when we could be sharing a feast. They proved that making everyone a winner is more powerful than making yourself the only winner. That seems too simple. The best truths usually are. The mentor looked around the chamber, where dozens of species worked together in ways that would have been unthinkable just years before. Humanity did not conquer the galaxy. They outnegotiated it. And in doing so, they showed us all a better way to live. The galaxy continued to turn. Wars still happened, but fewer than before. Conflicts still arose, but more were resolved peacefully. Species still competed, but more often as partners than as enemies. The change was not complete, would perhaps never be complete, but it was real and growing. And at the heart of it all, humanity continued its quiet work of understanding, connecting, and solving. They had not conquered the galaxy with force. They had transformed it with wisdom. And that, everyone agreed, was a far more lasting victory.